The sun hung low in the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Cottonwood Springs, as Ranger Sullivan folded the last of his shirts into the weathered leather satchel. His calloused hands, once steady as iron, now trembled like autumn leaves in the wind as he reached for the cream-colored envelope resting on the bedside table, the last words his Delilah had left him before she vanished from his life 3 months ago. It was 1878, and the Arizona Territory was no place for a man with a broken heart. Yet here he stood, 35 years old, with nothing but memories, and a letter he couldn't bring himself to read until today, when Marshall Thompson had ridden in with news that changed everything. "Delilah's alive, Roy. Spotted near Santa Fe." Roy Sullivan had been the fastest draw in 3 counties once upon a time, a Texas Ranger turned cattle rancher who'd hung up his guns when he married Delilah Davis 7 years ago. Now he stared at the letter, remembering how she'd carefully folded it, pressing it into his palm the morning she disappeared. "When you're ready," she'd whispered, her golden brown eyes glistening with tears, "when your hands stop shaking." His hands still shook, but time had run out for waiting. Roy settled onto the edge of the bed, the springs creaking under his weight. Outside, the wind carried the familiar sounds of Cottonwood Springs horses nickering, piano music drifting from the saloon, the blacksmith's hammer striking against metal. He broke the wax seal and unfolded the delicate paper, his heart pounding against his ribs. "My dearest Roy," the letter began in Delilah's flowing script. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. Do not search for me. This choice breaks my heart, but I cannot bear the weight of our shared sorrow any longer." The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. 3 miscarriages in 5 years had hollowed them both, but he'd never imagined she would leave. Their last loss, just 4 months ago, had nearly destroyed her. The baby boy had lived only 2 hours. "I need time to find myself again," she continued, "to discover if I am more than this endless cycle of hope and despair. Please forgive me for this final selfishness. I have loved you since the moment you rescued me from that stagecoach robbery, and I will love you until my last breath. But I cannot watch you suffer alongside me anymore. You deserve a wife who can give you children, who doesn't wake screaming in the night." Roy folded the letter, tucking it into his shirt pocket next to his heart. He stood, grabbing his hat from the peg by the door. Delilah was out there, somewhere in the vast territory, believing herself better off alone. The thought of her facing the harsh realities of the frontier without him filled him with cold dread. 3 hours later, Roy was riding hard toward Santa Fe, his stallion Midnight eating up the miles beneath a blanket of stars. The night air carried the scent of sage and dust as he pushed forward, determined to find the only woman he had ever loved. The journey to Santa Fe would take nearly a week, but Roy rode as if devils chased him, stopping only when his horse needed rest. At a trading post on the 3rd day, he encountered a Navajo trader who remembered a woman matching Delilah's description. "Pretty lady with hair like copper sunset," the man said, gesturing to his shoulders. "Eyes sad but kind." She traded fine needlework for supplies, heading north toward mining country. Durango, maybe. Roy adjusted his course, following the whispers of his wife's passage, a woman helping an injured child in a small settlement, a schoolteacher's assistant in a Mormon outpost, a seamstress who stayed for 2 weeks in a mining camp before moving on again. With each story, his heart swelled with pride and ached with longing. Delilah was leaving goodness in her wake, but never staying long enough to put down roots. After 3 weeks of searching, Roy reached a small mining town called Silver Creek, nestled in the mountains. The town had sprung up after silver was discovered, drawing prospectors and fortune seekers from across the country. As he rode down the muddy main street, he noticed a small boarding house with fresh curtains in the windows and flower boxes bursting with color touches that reminded him achingly of home. "Looking for a room, mister?" asked an older woman sweeping the porch. "Information, madam," Roy replied, removing his hat. "I'm searching for my wife, red hair about this tall, green eyes, name's Delilah Sullivan." The woman's expression shifted subtly. "Don't know any Sullivans," she said carefully, "but we do have a Miss Davis teaching at the schoolhouse." Showed up about 2 months back. Roy's heart hammered against his ribs. Where might I find this schoolhouse? End of town, past the church, she said, pointing. School's letting out soon. Roy nodded his thanks and led Midnight toward the simple wooden building. He tethered his horse at the hitching post and settled onto a bench across the street, where he could watch the schoolhouse door without being immediately visible. When the door swung open and children poured out like water from a broken dam, Roy straightened. And then he saw her, his Delilah, hair pulled back in a simple knot, wearing a plain blue dress as she ushered the last of the children out with a gentle smile. She looked thinner than he remembered, with new lines around her eyes, but the sight of her made his breath catch all the same. Roy stood, removing his hat, unable to move as she locked the schoolhouse door and turned to walk down the street. When she glanced up and saw him standing there, she froze, one hand flying to her throat. Roy. Her voice carried across the distance between them, fragile as spun glass. Hello, Delilah. He took a tentative step forward, unsure of his welcome. She shook her head slightly, as if clearing a vision. How did you find me? Wasn't easy, he said, closing half the distance between them. You left quite a trail of people who remembered your kindness. Tears welled in her eyes. You shouldn't have come. You're my wife. I left you a letter which said you needed time. Roy felt his voice crack. It's been 3 months, Del. I've given you time. Now I need to know if you're coming home. She looked down at her hands that had once reached for him in the darkness, that had held their dying son, that had packed her belongings while he was checking the north pasture that fateful day. I can't give you what you want, Roy. The only thing I want is you, he said firmly. The rest doesn't matter. A small crowd had gathered, watching their exchange with undisguised interest. Delilah glanced around nervously. Not here, she whispered. I have a room at the boarding house. We can talk there. They walked in silence, the afternoon sun casting long shadows ahead of them. Roy was acutely aware of the space between them, just inches, but it might as well have been miles. Delilah's room was small but neat, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. Books were stacked on every surface and papers covered a small writing desk. You're teaching, Roy said, noting a pile of student compositions. Yes, she removed her shawl, hanging it carefully on a peg. The town needed a teacher and I needed purpose. Our ranch wasn't purpose enough. She flinched at his tone. That's not fair, Roy. Neither was waking up to find you gone. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. No goodbye, just a letter I couldn't even read because my hands shook too damn much. I couldn't face you, she whispered. Not after burying our third child, not after seeing the way you looked at me like I was broken. I never, not intentionally. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed, but it was there all the same, the disappointment, the worry. You stopped laughing, Roy. You watched me like I might shatter. And maybe I was broken, but I couldn't heal while watching you suffer too. Roy knelt before her, finally close enough to catch the familiar scent of lavender that always clung to her skin. I worried because I love you, because each loss broke my heart too. I know. She touched his face gently, tracing the new lines around his eyes. That's why I had to leave. I was drowning in grief and pulling you down with me. So you let me think you were dead. Thompson said the stage to Denver was attacked by Comancheros. 4 passengers killed, her eyes widened. I never took that stage. I went north with a family heading to Utah. What made him think a woman matching your description was among the dead? No identification, when you didn't come home, and then I heard about the attack. His voice broke. I thought I'd lost you forever. Oh, Roy. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I never meant to cause such pain. I needed to find out who I was besides a wife who couldn't give her husband children. And have you, he asked gently. Found yourself, she looked around the small room, parts of me. I've discovered I'm a good teacher. The children here had no education before I came. I've made a difference. You always made a difference, Roy said. Every day to me. It wasn't enough. She met his eyes steadily. I needed to be more than your wife, more than a vessel for children we kept losing. Roy felt the truth of her words like a physical blow. He had loved her fiercely, protected her, provided for her, but had he seen her? Truly seen her beyond her role as his wife and potential mother to his children? I understand, he said finally. But I miss you, Del. Every day I miss you. I miss you too. Her voice was so soft he barely heard it. Then come home. She shook her head slowly. I can't, Roy, not yet. These children need me. I signed a contract for the school year. That's 6 more months. Yes, Roy stood, pacing the small room. I can't go back to the ranch without you, not now that I know you're alive. What are you saying? I'm saying I'll stay, here in Silver Creek, for as long as it takes. Delilah's eyes widened. The ranch, I hired Jenkins and his boys to run it before I left. They can manage a few more months. Roy's decision solidified as he spoke. I'll find work here, we can, court again, start over maybe, you do that, leave everything behind, Delilah. He knelt before her again, taking her hands in his. You are everything. The ranch, the cattle, the land, none of it matters without you. For the first time since he'd arrived, Delilah's smile reached her eyes. I've missed you, Roy Sullivan. Does that mean I can stay? I suppose Silver Creek could use a man who knows his way around horses and cattle, she said, a hint of her old teasing manner returning. But I keep my room. We court properly. I'm Miss Davis here, and that's how it stays until I decide otherwise. Roy nodded, relief washing through him. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild what they had lost. Yes, madam, whatever you say. I finish teaching at 4 every day, she continued. You may call on me after that if you wish. I wish, he said simply. That evening, Roy secured a room at the boarding house and a job breaking horses for the stage line that ran through Silver Creek. The work was dangerous but familiar, and it kept him busy during the days when Delilah was teaching. Evenings, they would walk through town or sit on the boarding house porch, carefully rebuilding the bridge between them. For the first time, Roy truly listened when Delilah spoke of her dreams that extended beyond their ranch and family. She had always wanted to teach, she confessed, but had set that aspiration aside when they married. Why didn't you tell me? He asked as they sat by the creek on a Sunday afternoon, a respectable distance between them on the blanket. You were so proud of our ranch, of the life you built, she said, weaving a crown of wildflowers. And I was proud to be part of it, but after each baby. She paused, the familiar grief passing over her features. After each loss, I felt like I was failing at the one thing I was supposed to do. Teaching these children has helped me see I'm good at other things. Important things. You never failed, Roy said firmly. Not at anything, she smiled sadly. We both know that's not true, but I'm learning to forgive myself, to find purpose beyond motherhood. Could you find purpose in both? Roy asked carefully. Teaching and being my wife. I'm still your wife, she reminded him. That hasn't changed. You know what I mean, Del. She was silent for a long moment, watching the water rush over stones. I don't know if I can try again, Roy, the thought of another loss. What if we didn't? He suggested. What if we accepted that our family might just be the two of us? Delilah looked at him sharply. You've always wanted children, a son to inherit the ranch. I want you more. He reached for her hand tentatively, and she allowed him to take it. These past months without you. I'd trade a dozen sons for another day with you, Del. She squeezed his hand, tears glistening in her eyes. You say that now, but in a year, 5 years, when your brothers have sons and your friends' children are grown, I say it forever, Roy promised. Besides, you have 30 children at that schoolhouse. Maybe that's enough for both of us. For the first time in longer than Roy could remember, Delilah laughed a real laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners and her head tilt back. The sound was so beautiful, so achingly familiar, that he had to fight the urge to pull her into his arms. Days turned to weeks as summer gave way to fall in the mountains. Roy continued breaking horses and began helping the local ranchers with their cattle as word of his skills spread. Delilah thrived in her teaching, organizing a harvest festival where her students presented their learning to the town. Roy watched with swelling pride as she stood before the community, confident and radiant in a way he'd never seen at the ranch. As October painted the aspen trees gold, Roy and Delilah settled into a comfortable routine. They ate breakfast together at the boarding house each morning before parting for their respective duties. In the evenings, they would read together in the parlor or take walks when the weather permitted. On Saturdays, Roy would accompany Delilah to the mercantile, carrying her purchases and tipping his hat to the townspeople who now accepted him as a permanent fixture in Silver Creek. They were courting, just as Roy had promised. though the intimacy of their years together sometimes made the arrangement feel absurd. He knew every inch of her body, had heard her cries of passion and held her through nights of despair. Yet now he waited for permission to kiss her goodnight at her door. One evening in late October, as the first snow dusted the mountain peaks, Delilah invited Roy to her room for tea, a first since his arrival in Silver Creek. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured the steaming liquid into chipped porcelain cups. "I've been thinking," she said, settling into the rocking chair while Roy perched on the edge of her bed. "About us, about the future." Roy's heart quickened. "Oh, I received a letter today." She reached for a folded paper on her desk. "The school board has asked me to stay on permanently. They're offering to build a proper teacherage, a little house for me beside the school." "I see." Roy tried to keep his voice neutral, though disappointment settled heavy in his chest. "And you're considering it?" "I am." She met his eyes steadily, but not alone. Roy set down his teacup carefully. "What are you saying, Delilah?" "I'm saying, perhaps there's room for both dreams." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I could teach and we could be husband and wife again, truly." "Here in Silver Creek," Roy clarified, hardly daring to hope. "Yes. The town is growing. They need someone who understands ranching and horses. The mayor mentioned just yesterday how valuable you've become." Roy crossed to her, kneeling before her chair as he had that first day. "Are you sure, Del? The ranch is just land," she finished for him. "We could sell it or keep it and hire a foreman. Your brothers might want to buy your share. There are options, Roy." He took her hands, noticing they were steady now. "And what about children?" She took a deep breath. "If it happens, it happens. But I won't build my happiness on something so uncertain anymore. I want to be your wife because I love you, not because I might give you a son someday." "That's all I've ever wanted," Roy said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just you loving me." "Then yes," she whispered, leaning forward until their foreheads touched. "I'll be Mrs. Sullivan again, though to the school children I'll remain Miss Davis." Roy laughed, joy bubbling up from a place he thought had gone dry forever. "Mrs. Sullivan at home, Miss Davis in the classroom. I can live with that arrangement." "There's one more thing," Delilah said, pulling back slightly. "The teacherage won't be ready until spring. Until then, I'll continue to court you properly," Roy promised. "No," she touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I was thinking you might move your things in here, if you want to." Roy's breath caught. "Are you sure?" In answer, Delilah leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, their first kiss in nearly 6 months. It was tentative at first, like testing ice on a winter pond, but then she sighed against his mouth and the years fell away. Roy gathered her to him, lifting her from the chair as the kiss deepened, tasting of tea and promise and homecoming. That night, they rediscovered each other slowly, reverently, healing old wounds with gentle touches and whispered affirmations. Afterward, as Delilah slept in his arms, Roy marveled at the journey that had led them here, not back to where they started, but to somewhere new and unexpectedly right. Winter arrived with a vengeance in Silver Creek, burying the town in deep snow that isolated it from the outside world for weeks at a time. Roy and Delilah settled into their shared room at the boarding house, creating a small haven of warmth against the biting cold. With school often canceled due to blizzards, they spent long days reading aloud to each other, playing chess and planning their future. "What if we built our own place?" Roy suggested one evening as they lay in bed, listening to the wind howl outside their window. "Not the teacherage, but a small ranch just outside town, close enough for you to walk to school, but with enough land for a few horses and cattle." "Could we afford that?" Delilah asked, her head resting on his chest. "I've been saving most of what I earn," Roy admitted. "And there's a parcel of land north of town that the bank foreclosed on last year. Miller at the bank mentioned it might be available for a reasonable price." Delilah propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the lamplight. "You've been planning this." "Hoping," he corrected. "There's a difference," she smiled, tracing patterns on his chest. "I like the idea, a fresh start with room for both our dreams." The following week, when the weather cleared, Roy rode out to inspect the land. 20 acres with a small creek running through it, a dilapidated cabin that could be rebuilt, and enough grazing for a modest herd. By spring thaw, the property was theirs, purchased with their combined savings and the promise of Roy's share in the family ranch. As the snow receded and wildflowers began to dot the meadows, Roy and Delilah threw themselves into creating their new home. School continued through June, so Delilah could only help on weekends, but Roy worked tirelessly, enlisting help from townsmen who had come to respect his quiet competence over the winter months. By midsummer, the cabin had been transformed into a proper house with 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a front porch where Delilah could grade papers while watching the sunset over the mountains. They moved in on her birthday, July 15th, exactly 1 year after she had left the ranch in Texas. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Sullivan," Roy said, carrying her over the threshold as tradition demanded. "It feels like a rebirth," she said, looking around at their new home, a perfect blend of her touches and his craftsmanship. "For both of us." That night, as they lay in their new bed beneath a quilt Delilah had pieced during the long winter evenings, Roy retrieved a small package from his jacket. "One more birthday gift," he said, placing it in her hands. Delilah unwrapped the paper to find a silver locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of Roy on one side, and on the other, pressed forget-me-nots, the first flowers he had ever given her during their courtship years ago. "How did you preserve these?" she asked, touching the delicate blue petals in wonder. "I didn't," Roy admitted. "These are from this spring. I found them growing behind the schoolhouse and thought of you. Some things are meant to come back year after year. Like us," she whispered, closing the locket and pressing it to her heart. "Like us," he agreed, kissing her softly. The remainder of the year passed in a blur of activity as they established their small ranch. Roy purchased 6 mares and a stallion, starting a modest breeding operation while continuing to break horses for the stage company. Delilah taught during the days and planted a garden that flourished under her care. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. They still spoke of the children they had lost, but the sharp pain had dulled to a bittersweet ache, a part of their shared history rather than an open wound. They visited the small cemetery in Cottonwood Springs once, laying flowers on 3 tiny graves before saying their final goodbyes to that chapter of their lives. As Christmas approached, bringing with it a blanket of snow and festive preparations, Delilah began to suspect what her body was trying to tell her. She waited until she was certain before saying anything to Roy, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed once again. On Christmas morning, as they exchanged simple gifts before the fire, Delilah handed Roy a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "One more," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Roy unwrapped it carefully, revealing a tiny pair of knitted booties. "Del." His voice cracked as he looked up at her, eyes wide with both hope and fear. "Dr. Pearson confirmed it yesterday," she said, taking his hands in hers. "I'm about 3 months along. The baby should come in June after the school year ends." Roy's hands began to shake, just as they had the day she left him. Are we? "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but also hopeful. This feels different somehow. I'm stronger now, we both are." Roy gathered her into his arms, his body trembling with emotion. "Whatever happens, we face it together this time. No running away, no shutting each other out. No more shaking hands," she whispered against his neck. "Whatever comes, we'll be steady for each other." The winter passed with agonizing slowness as they watched Delilah's body change, each week bringing both joy and anxiety. When she felt the first flutters of movement, Roy would press his hand against her growing belly for hours, talking softly to the child within. The townsfolk of Silver Creek rallied around them, the women organizing a quilting bee for the baby, while the men helped Roy add a nursery to their small house. As promised, Delilah finished the school year, though by May her condition was obvious to everyone. The school board, impressed with her dedication, offered her the position again for the fall, with the understanding that she might need a late start depending on the baby's arrival. "You don't have to decide now," the chairman told her. "The position is yours when you're ready, whether that's September or next January." June arrived with sunshine and wildflowers, painting the meadows around their home in vibrant color. Delilah's time grew near, and Roy found himself unable to venture far from the house, always listening for her call, always ready to ride for the doctor at the first sign of trouble. On the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, their daughter entered the world after a labor that tested both their resolve. Roy paced outside their bedroom as the doctor and midwife attended Delilah, her cries tearing at his soul. When the baby's first wail pierced the air, he sagged against the wall in relief, tears streaming unashamed down his weathered face. "You can come in now, Mr. Sullivan," the midwife called, opening the door. "You have a healthy daughter." Roy entered the room on unsteady legs, his eyes immediately finding Delilah propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up at him, her smile brighter than he had ever seen it. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Roy sat carefully on the edge of the bed, peering at the tiny red face wrapped in a soft blanket. The baby yawned, her miniature fingers flexing beside her cheek. "She's perfect," he whispered, touching one finger to his daughter's palm. The tiny hand closed around his finger with surprising strength. "We've waited so long for you," Delilah told the baby, her voice thick with emotion. "Your brothers and sisters are watching over you from heaven, but we're so glad you're here with us. What shall we call her?" Roy asked, unable to tear his gaze from his daughter's face. Delilah looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and joy. "I was thinking, Rose, for new beginnings." Rose Sullivan, Roy tested the name, feeling it settle perfectly in his heart. "It's beautiful, like her mother." As the summer sun began its slow descent, casting golden light through the bedroom window, the small family huddled together on the bed, Delilah resting against Roy's chest, baby Rose sleeping peacefully in her arms. Outside, the horses nickered in the paddock, and a meadowlark sang its evening song. "Thank you," Roy murmured against Delilah's hair. "For what? For coming back to me, for not giving up." Delilah turned her face up to his, her eyes reflecting all the love and pain and growth of their journey. "Thank you for finding me, for seeing me, truly seeing me." He kissed her gently, mindful of her exhaustion. "I see you, Delilah Sullivan, teacher, mother, wife, strongest woman I've ever known. And I see you, Roy Sullivan," she whispered back, "the man whose hands no longer shake when he holds his daughter." Roy looked down at his hands, one supporting Delilah's back, the other resting protectively on Rose's blanket. They were steady as the mountains surrounding their home, strong as the love that had survived separation, grief, and rebirth. Outside their window, the first star of evening appeared in the twilight sky. Roy made a silent wish, not for more children or greater fortune, but simply for this. More days like today, with the woman who had left him only to be found again, and the daughter who represented all the promise of their future together. 5 years later, Delilah stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Roy taught 6-year-old Rose to ride her new pony. The little girl's copper hair, so like her mother's, streamed behind her as she bounced in the saddle, her father's steady hand on the lead rope keeping her safe. "Not too fast, Daddy," Rose called, though her wide grin belied any real fear. "Steady as she goes, Rosie," Roy replied, his face creased with pride and joy. Delilah rested her hands on her swollen belly, feeling the movements of the child within another daughter, she suspected, though she hadn't shared this intuition with Roy. After Rose, they had suffered another loss, but this pregnancy had progressed smoothly past any dangerous milestones. The baby was due in a month, just after the end of the school year. The Silver Creek School had grown along with the town, and Delilah now supervised 2 assistant teachers while continuing to teach the older students herself. She had found her balanced mother, wife, and teacher roles that complemented rather than competed with each other. Roy's horse breeding business had flourished, allowing them to add onto their house and purchase additional acreage. Life wasn't perfect, but it was rich and full in ways neither of them could have imagined during those dark days of separation. Rose dismounted with Roy's help and ran toward the house, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mama, did you see me riding Thunder all by myself?" "I did, my brave girl," Delilah said, bending as much as her condition allowed to embrace her daughter. "You're a natural horsewoman, just like your father." And smart as her mother, Roy added, climbing the porch steps to join them. He placed a gentle hand on Delilah's stomach. "How are you feeling?" "Wonderful," she assured him, covering his hand with hers. "Though your son or daughter seems determined to practice dancing today." Roy grinned, the lines around his eyes crinkling with happiness. At 42, silver had begun to thread through his dark hair, but he remained as strong and steady as the day he'd ridden into Silver Creek searching for his lost wife. "Must take after you then. I've got 2 left feet." "That's not what you said at the Founders' Day dance," Delilah teased, leaning into his embrace. "As I recall, you swept me right off my feet." "Only because you let me," he countered, pressing a kiss to her temple. Rose tugged at her father's hand. "Can we have the picnic now?" "You promised we could eat by the creek today, so I did, Miss Rosie." Roy scooped her up with one arm. "Why don't you help me fetch the basket your mama packed?" As they disappeared into the house, Delilah gazed out over their land, the paddocks filled with horses, the garden bursting with early summer vegetables, the grove of trees Roy had planted the year Rose was born. She thought about the folded letter she had left behind all those years ago, never imagining it would lead them here, to this life that contained both heartache and overwhelming joy. When Roy returned with Rose and the picnic basket, his free hand automatically reaching for Delilah's, she felt a familiar surge of gratitude. His hands were weathered now, marked by years of hard work, but they remained completely steady when they held his family, the surest sign of a man who had found his true north after being lost. "Ready?" he asked, squeezing her fingers gently. "Always," Delilah replied, stepping forward with him into the golden afternoon light, their shadows stretching before them like the promise of all the years to come.